WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net, broadcasting live on our Facebook Live, as well as on WNSTV on YouTube. The Baltimore Orioles back after it. It doesn't matter what country they play in at this point. They're winning baseball games. Luke Jones here to discuss all things Orioles baseball today. And, hey, man, off to a good start. You know, when they get on these runs like this, it feels like they're going to score the last run in a tie game late. It's just that feeling you had in 12, the feeling you had in 14, and here we are in June, they're in first place. No reason not to feel that way, right, Luke?
No doubt about it, and they excel in the late innings because they do have a good offense. Even if it's not the best in baseball, it's certainly good enough, and they have the best bullpen in the major leagues. Their bullpen ERA is tops among the 30 teams, and you saw what happened on Thursday night when Toronto got into their bullpen. And it's not that Marcus Stroman was all that good either, but clearly Toronto, I mean, their starting pitching's been exceptional this year. Their bullpen has been vulnerable. So that's why the Orioles have excelled in so many of these late-game situations, because they're able to hold the opposition. Even a guy like Dylan Bundy, who is fourth or fifth in the pecking order in that bullpen right now, but he comes in and does a really nice job, pitches 2 1/3 important innings to not just blow up the bullpen for the rest of the weekend or prevent that from happening, but also keeping the Orioles in a one-run game, and he was able to do that. And then the Orioles, they get the home run from Alvarez to close the gap to 1. Chris Davis ties it in the 7th inning, and then in the 9th inning, Hyun-Soo Kim with the double, and then they play a little bit of small ball to move them over to third, and Chris Davis with the sacrifice fly. Really nice win, 5th straight win for the Orioles, and we talked a lot about the importance of this road trip. 4 in Toronto, and then they go to Fenway Park for 3. Nice to get off to that good start on a high note when you know you're going to be playing some big games on the road over the next week.
Well, and in this series in particular, the pitching matchups aren't all that favorable for the Orioles on paper, right? And then there's just the whole thing where this is a division game, everything's going to count twice, kind of, sort of. It really is nice to get this thing off to a good start, especially on a night when the youngsters struggled a little bit.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, Tyler Wilson early on was not good at all. I'll give him credit that he settled in enough to the point where he did get into the 6th inning. I mean, if you watch this game early on, you're wondering if he was going to make it out of the 2nd or 3rd inning. So I'll give him credit in that regard. Wasn't good enough overall. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. He talked in the postgame, too many balls up in the strike zone, but he settled in enough. And like I said, Chris Davis is the hero because he drove in the tying and the winning runs. But Dylan Bundy, I mean, you can't speak enough about the work that he was able to do. And when you're able to win a game like that with Darren O'Day, we understand he's on the DL, so that means you have to save Brad Brock and Michael Givens for some of those later innings. But you can win a game, one-run game in the way that the Orioles did on Thursday night. And really the extent of it is, besides what Bundy did, Zach Britton throws 8 pitches in the 9th inning. That's good, especially when you didn't get a great start from your starting pitcher. So it was really good to see that. And, Dylan Bundy gives them 47 pitches, and those were all high-leverage pitches where, he didn't have much margin for error trying to keep the Orioles within 1 run. So it was really nice to see that. Like I said, Tyler Wilson, not good enough overall, obviously, when you look at the stats, but at the very least, he was able to battle and get into the 6th inning, which after those first 2 innings, you really didn't think that was going to be a possibility.
Luke Jones joining us here. We are on our Facebook Live as well as at WNSTV. Hello to everyone viewing in. It's the beginning of all sorts of trouble I'll be creating out here on the internet at WNST. Meanwhile, the Birds in Toronto the rest of the weekend, and I guess Dylan Bundy becomes a big story now, right? We've heard so much. We're now, about 40 innings into this experiment. We've heard maybe a starter at some point, stretching him out a little bit. Would you be shocked if in August, if the Jimenez thing isn't working, if the Gallardo thing doesn't work, if we get more wrong efforts by Mike Wright and more efforts by the youngster where you get the bullpen up in the 2nd and the 3rd inning like we saw on Thursday night, that Dylan Bundy would be somewhere short of Vance Worley by, let's say, August 10th or something, like, 60 days down the line?
I mean, could I see him getting a couple starts maybe at the very end of the season? Yeah, but they've also, Buck Showalter's also been very headstrong in saying that they're looking for him to pitch around 70 innings this year. I mean, keep in mind, this is a guy who hasn't pitched, hasn't pitched with any extensive innings since, you have to go back to 2012. So, it's really a fine line for them. He did a really nice job on Thursday night, but overall, his numbers haven't exactly screamed, let's give him a shot in the rotation right now. His strikeout per 9 innings hasn't been all that great. He's given up a lot of hits, a lot of base runners. Even after his performance on Thursday night, still has an ERA in the mid-4s, 4.50 to be exact. So, would I be shocked to see him maybe get a spot start or two if they are really struggling in that regard? I guess that wouldn't shock me, but I would be shocked if in August they're suddenly talking about him being a regular member of the rotation, because they've just been very adamant from a health standpoint that they have, and development standpoint that they have goals as far as how many innings he's going to get. And, considering the fact that he's already given them in the neighborhood of really, he's been a guy who's given them some length. He's just shy of 30 innings on the season already. So if they're talking about 70, that doesn't give them much wiggle room as far as stretching him out. But, could I see him, and you mentioned the Vance Worley role, well, he served that last night. He was able, or Thursday night, he was able to give them some length. He was able to pitch in a one-run game and be competitive and not let it get out of hand and allow this offense a chance to do what it does. So I think he's certainly intriguing for the future. They're certainly envisioning him being a starting pitcher in 2017. They're hoping it works out that way, but you just consider that didn't pitch at all in 2013, and even the last 2 years he had the issue with the calcification in his shoulder last year, and in 2014 was still battling his way back from the surgery. He's just pitched so little that it's tough to say, okay, one, we're going to stretch him out. Two, we're going to forego what we've said about a goal in terms of innings for still a very young pitcher in the grand scheme of things. And three, even though he pitched well on Thursday night, you just haven't seen enough from him yet to say this kid absolutely needs to be in a starting rotation of a contending club right now. But if they have enough injuries, if they have enough pitchers that are continuing to be ineffective, would it stun me to see him get a shot or two if they need it? I guess not.
Luke Jones joining us here. We're talking all things Orioles baseball, and obviously, Dylan Bundy on the back end of another Oriole victory. Now it'll be Gausman and Estrada, Wright and Happ, and then on Sunday we get the long day of Ubaldo Jimenez and Sanchez. The Blue Jays burned up the bullpen. Gibbons went through everybody. 5 guys out of the bullpen on Thursday night, burning them up. He really tried to win the game. When the game's tied at that point, that's a tough loss for Toronto to a first-place team to back up even further. I think they sense the gravity of the situation for the weekend and that the Orioles are playing some great baseball right now, and a lot of pop flies are turning into home runs.
I was frankly surprised that he pulled Stroman when he did, and Pedro Alvarez hits the home run.
By the way, so was Stroman apparently.
Yeah, and he was at 95 pitches, so I'm not saying he would have gone too much longer, but he had kind of settled in, really. The Orioles, as much as we talked about Tyler Wilson being knocked around, the Orioles knocked Stroman around pretty good over those first couple innings, and I believe he had retired 9 of the previous 10 hitters he faced before Alvarez goes to the opposite field for the home run. So I found that to be somewhat surprising, especially because Toronto's bullpen is so shaky. The Blue Jays' starting pitching has been outstanding, a lot better than I thought it would be. Their offense hasn't been what you thought, and it hasn't been their big guns struggling. It's been everyone else that kind of really surprised last year and made them such a dangerous lineup. The best lineup in the majors a year ago, and they've been. I don't know if I'd say they've been terrible, but they haven't been certainly haven't been what you expected. But the Achilles heel for that team has been its bullpen. As much as you get to the very end and you like what you have in Osuna, even though the Orioles plated the winning run against him. They have a bunch of guys that you kind of look at and say, well, I'll take my chances against that pitcher. I'm not really scared by that guy. So I was a little surprised by that. But the way that he did manage, you're absolutely right. I mean, he was matching up even in the seventh inning. To see him going batter to batter. We saw, of course, Aaron Loop give up the home run to Chris Davis, even though Davis had struggled against lefties this year. But Loop wasn't able to do the job there. So it is interesting. I mean, it's not as though anyone in their bullpen threw so many pitches that they're out of commission. Grilly, I think, threw 24 or 25. So I would think maybe they'd try to stay away from him on Friday night at least. But, I mean, overall, that's a bullpen that you really see a stark contrast. And it was funny. I was watching some MLB Network coverage late on Thursday night, and a couple different games where bullpens were letting the game get away, or a close game suddenly becomes a not so close game, and really just gives you an appreciation for the talent that the Orioles have in their bullpen, and B, Buck Showalter's ability to use a bullpen and to make sure he's not overthrowing guys and working guys too hard. I mean, I think he's able to keep everyone's innings at a reasonable level. That's why it's important to see someone like Dylan Bundy do what he did on Thursday night. One, he gave them a great chance to win, and they were able to come back and win the ball game. And two, and this is probably even more important than even getting the win, as crazy as that might sound, he kept everyone else from having to do any work other than Britton, very briefly pitching a ninth inning that was really easy. That's huge. That sets you up to win on Friday. That sets you up to have a good chance to win on Saturday and Sunday if you get even decent starting pitching, starting pitching that can at least keep you in the game, and that'll keep them in better shape then as they go to Fenway Park then. So, I mean, that's the thing about a manager. As much as you know me, I'm a sabermetrics guy. I know all the arguments about going to your bullpen, third time through the order for a starter. I get it. But the reality is you can't use your top two or three guys every single night and expect them to continue to be effective for a 6-month season. It just doesn't work that way. So when you get an outing like Dylan Bundy was able to give them, one, it's good for Bundy's development, and we know what the Orioles hope he can eventually become. But two, it just it sets them up to be able to really fire their best bullets in the bullpen over the next 3 or 4 days. So it's just it's a credit to Bundy, and it's a credit to Buck Showalter to be willing to go as far as he did. And does it always work out? No. Have there been times where you go with someone like Bundy or Vance Worley or one of your lesser guys in the bullpen, and maybe they give up a couple more runs and you're down 2 or 3 in the ninth inning? Yeah, that's going to happen, but in the big picture, it's the best way to go as opposed to just saying, well, Brad Brock, we're going to need you to pitch for the next 5 nights. I mean, Buck just doesn't do those kind of things.
Luke Jones joining us here. We're talking all things Orioles baseball. Orioles haven't lost in a week. It's a kind of a nice feeling. And what does the song say? Every night there's a different star. That's the magic of Oriole baseball, right? And I guess Alvarez now hitting the baseball, right? I mean, Kim has become, I don't want to say a major part of this, but certainly he's in the lineup a whole lot here lately, and they're winning a lot of ball games with him around. So there really is something to be said for that. And I even tweeted last week, you kind of have to give the credit at this point to Dan Duquette on that, right? And maybe a little bit of the patience that they showed in bringing him north, because there was a lot of thought about sending him back to Korea, and certainly the organization was behind those thoughts, right?
Yeah, it's funny now looking back. I mean, we talk so much about Hyun-Soo Kim's future with this club, and whether they'd try to send him back to Korea, whether they'd get him to agree to go to the minor leagues. And it's funny, guys like me, and we talked about this quite a bit with who was scouting this guy. If they thought he was that much of a scrub in the spring, what happened with their scouting that they signed this guy to a guaranteed 2 years, $7 million contract where you couldn't send him to the minor leagues. Well, now a few months later, I think you look back and say, well, who did scout him? And, seems like they did a pretty good job. And then in the spring, it was a case of maybe the organization as a whole, and that's Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette and everyone needed to have a little more patience, realize that, hey, this guy has some ability, He was playing in the KBO, which is, most people say is comparable to about Double A. There's going to be an adjustment. I don't care how good you are. If you're playing against lesser competition and then you come to the major leagues, I mean, the best players in the world, chances are you're not going to set the world on fire from day one. So, they brought him along slowly, I think, and he's even acknowledged this. Him watching as much as he did over the first 6-7 weeks of the season, where he was only getting a start a week and maybe a pinch hitting assignment here or there in a blowout game, he actually thinks that helped him because it kind of gave him a context of, okay, these are what these pitchers look like. I see what my teammates are doing. I see what Adam Jones does. I see what Mark Trumbo does. I understand what you have to do in terms of going about your business to be a major leaguer a little bit more now. And finally, when that last road trip or previous road trip where they were struggling so much in Houston, remember, he was kind of the sole highlight from that disaster of a series against the Astros, and he's been able to take the ball and run with it in terms of his opportunities. So it's been really nice to see that. You mentioned Alvarez swinging the bat better. Ryan Flaherty, the final couple games of the Royals series, was an unlikely offensive hero. So, but we talked about this 2012, 2014, where they've really had their success. And it's not as though they didn't get any contributions from unlikely guys in those 13 and 2015 seasons. But you can't just rely on Manny Machado and Mark Trumbo and Chris Davis and Adam Jones to do it every single night and every single week. I mean, those guys are going to struggle. I mean, Adam Jones, we have seen him struggle this year more so than in recent years. But when you have guys like Kim and Alvarez, and when Jonathan Scope's going well, when they have Matt Wieters healthy, and we saw what he was able to do really for the most of May, you have a great chance to win then. So it's become a much more balanced lineup. And you mentioned Kim as far as maybe not being a major contributor. I'll say he has been, in the sense that we've talked so much about how much power this team has. They can hit the long ball. And look, no one, as much as people want to complain about that sometimes, I'll take guys who can hit home runs as opposed to teams that need to bunt and scratch out one or two runs, trying to win.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, dude. I mean,
in the big picture,
watching the Yankees come in here and not be able to hit the ball, right?
Kansas City, Kansas City scored 4 runs in a six game period in a losing streak. And look, it's going to be ugly sometimes, but I guess my point is, Hyun-Soo Kim's exactly what people have been clamoring for, and he doesn't hit for a ton of power, although he had a big double in the 9th inning on Thursday night. But good at bats. He's drawn some walks, and he's just a line drive machine to this point. That's exactly what they needed. That's exactly what they needed, and they were hoping they were going to get from him when they signed him in December. So I'll say that he has been a pretty big part of what they've been able to do. Now, the question will be, can he continue that? Because the league will continue to see what his strengths are, and they'll try to adjust, and then you'll see how he adjusts. So I think he's been a welcome addition in the number 2 spot in that lineup. And I've said to you, I'm still skeptical that Adam Jones will stay in the leadoff role all year, even though he's actually done a pretty decent job in that role. Drew another walk on Thursday night even. But I would not be shocked if Hyun-Soo Kim eventually becomes their leadoff hitter before the season's over. And this is a big if, and look, he's not going to continue to hit 365, 370 all year, but if he continue to be that guy who's spraying line drives and drawing walks and having good at-bats and getting on base, wouldn't stun me to see him in the leadoff spot before the season's over. I'm just going to throw that out there now in case it does happen.
You start to scoreboard watch a little bit when you get in first place, right? Like, I've been on the phone this week with Jeff Wilson down in Texas. You can hear that in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault, talking about the Rangers and their surge. Obviously, I've been on the phone with people in Cleveland because of the Cavaliers and them winning the other night and keeping the series a little bit more alive. Even Detroit is maybe the hottest team in baseball and surging right now. There's some good stuff going on, not just here, and I know you would have liked to see more people out there Wednesday night, but, you start to get into the vibe of people are watching the team now over the weekend. When they're on this kind of a streak where they haven't lost in a week, you would think people would pick it up a little bit, and certainly going to Fenway Park, there's going to be a first place versus second place battle all during the middle of next week in June. As a baseball fan wearing the white panel cap right now, I mean, what more do you want at this point?
I mean, let's face it. If at the end of the season, at the beginning of the season, if someone had told you the Orioles would be 13 games over 500 and didn't tell you when, that would just say 13 games over 500, you'd say, okay, well, I'll take that because that probably means they were extremely competitive for the duration of the season, you would think, unless there was a second half collapse. And who knows? Maybe I'm jinxing them by saying that right now. But my point is, I don't think too many of us even thought they would be 13 games over 500 at any point, let alone still approaching the middle of June. It just really speaks to how well they've played overall. This isn't a perfect team. We know that. But they've pitched really, really well out of the bullpen. I mean, better than they have even the last couple of years. And that's saying a lot because Darren O'Day is hurt. And let's face it, hadn't been quite the same Darren O'Day that we'd seen even before the injury. And they've gotten better contributions from Brad Brock, who was pretty darn good even the last couple of years. Michael Givens has had his issues against lefties, but he's been outstanding against right-handed hitters. And Zach Britton, I haven't even mentioned him other than just saying he got the 8-pitch save without any issue. He's 19 for 19 now. He's set the franchise record for consecutive save conversions to begin a season. He's been really, really good. The offense has been, I think, from a power standpoint, hasn't been surprising. As I mentioned, that Houston series aside, they haven't struck out quite as much as I might have anticipated. That hasn't been a grave problem for them, other than against the Astros, which I get it; it was ugly. But they've drawn a few more walks than I would have expected. That they've been top 5 in the American League in on-base percentage. Their offense has been a little bit better than I thought it would be all the way around, I guess I would say. The bullpen's been outstanding. The starting pitching's been a question mark. There's no doubt about that. That will continue to be the biggest question, and if they fall short ultimately, that'll probably be the biggest reason why. But overall, this team's played really good baseball, and it's so funny. I've heard some people try to discredit the fact, well, if you take away both of their 7-game winning streaks, well, they've been a below 500 team. Well,
hey, Sunday morning they might have another 7-game winning streak. I mean, that's where we are.
True, but even if you take those away, that's like saying, well, if you take away Denzel Washington's acting chops and his good looks, no one would know who he is. I mean, that's part of those 2 7-game winning streaks, and now a 5-game winning streak going into Friday. That's a big portion of the season. So,
well, we haven't had a lot of years where they've been 6-10 at any point ever, right? So let alone early in a season where the other teams, the Yankees aren't coming and getting anybody, So you're waiting, and it's teams like Toronto and the Red Sox that are going to be the ones they're going to have to come get them. I just want to say this on being this good and being 13 games over. It really does come down to tight games, right? Like in these, and I remember that from 14. I remember that from 12. Hell, I remember that from 1983 and 79. It's those nights when it's 3-2 and you're losing in the 7th inning and you still find a way to win. The games that are 8-2 at that point, you don't win. The game, in the games where you're winning 8-2, you just win. It's those close games, and there's an it factor about that. When Ryan Flaherty gets big hits, right?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, this team, even with their struggles that they had on their last road trip where, and they come home, they lose the first 2 games to the Red Sox, a lot of people were starting to ask me, okay, when's training camp start? And I didn't get the sense that they were in that much of a crisis mode. Look, it wasn't good. They were struggling. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not saying that it was automatically going to turn around, but at the same time, we're still talking about a team that was 6-7 games over 500 at that point where just, hey, pump the brakes. This team still played good baseball, more good baseball than bad baseball in 2016. And as you mentioned, I mean, they've had a vibe to them that has felt very 2014-like, very, I'd say better than 2012 because 2012 there was still a sense, at least among outsiders, that the bottom, the other shoe was going to drop at some point. It just never happened, and they took off really over the final 6 weeks, really from the point that they called up Manny Machado. 2014, they didn't take off until about July, but they had a good vibe to them.
It felt wire to wire, but the Blue Jays were the team that got off to the good start that year,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I mean, that's you mentioning the Blue Jays getting off to the good start that year, and then the Orioles completely surging past them. us talking about this doesn't mean the Orioles are just going to run away with this thing by any means. I mean, I think you look at Boston's offense, you look at Toronto's starting pitching. All three of these teams, and at this point, I agree with you with the Yankees. Although they've won 4 in a row, they still look like they just don't have enough offensively. Their starting pitching isn't going to be great enough to overcome that, and that bullpen, as great as the back end is, I question how many times they're going to be able to get to them with a lead. Tampa Bay hasn't been good enough. Offensively, their pitching hasn't been as good as it needs to be when you have an offense that's just eh. So you look at Baltimore, Boston, and Toronto, and all three of those teams have things that they do that are great. All three of those teams have deficiencies. So we'll see how it plays out. But when you're talking about an Orioles team playing 6-10 baseball on pace to win 98, 99 games at this point, I don't know if they're going to do that, but I'm feeling more and more confident that this team's going to be able to play good enough, and even their starting pitching being what it is, I still think the other phases of this team are going to be so good that I think they're still going to be in contention. So, I think at this point, it's time to embrace what this team has done. Doesn't mean that it's going to continue at this same successful rate, but every challenge they've been able to answer, even their bump in the road that they had at the end of May going into the beginning of this month, they've come out of that, having won 5 straight and 7 of 8. I mean, it's been really, really nice to see.
This would be a great week for them to play well. That's all I can say. Toronto, Boston on the road. We'll see how it goes the rest of the weekend. Luke Jones can be followed at Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. We got the rest of the weekend beginning with Friday night, Gosman and Estrada. Saturday is a 1 o'clock game. That's Wright and Happ. And then on Sunday, of course, Sanchez and Jimenez. Don't make plans after 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper hits your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And, of course, if there's any breaking news, aside from the Machado suspension, Luke, you want to throw anything in on that, where we are with that? And, obviously, the draft. I cut you a little short because we're waxing on about the first place 6-10 playing Orioles who haven't lost in a week, but there's been some other stuff going on before we break out.
There has been, and Manny Machado getting 4 games, which I think, all things considered, you'll take that as an Orioles fan. I thought it was possible it could have been a couple more games than that, but I think it does reflect that they thought Yordano Ventura was the guiltier party, which is correct because he was. But the other side of this, Yordano Ventura gets 9 games. I'm not shocked by this, but it really reflects what we talked about a couple days ago when this all went down. Major League Baseball is not serious about curtailing this stuff. So maybe we shouldn't get so bent out of shape and concerned when it happens. I don't know. Because a guy who's a repeat offender, had been suspended before, has had these kinds of skirmishes with multiple teams in the past, even if it wasn't all necessarily him throwing at somebody, but he's clearly had his run-ins, and he's going to miss 1 start. How much of a message are you really sending if you're Major League Baseball? If he's going to appeal, he'll end up dropping the appeal when they get their rotation slotted, and he's going to miss 1 start. I'm not surprised because history suggests they don't take this stuff seriously. So,
the other part of it is, what could you do worse at 99 miles an hour other than raise it by 10 inches, right? Like, I don't know what the worst thing you can do as a pitcher on the mound is start a brawl by throwing at someone, and the worst thing you can do is throw at their head at full speed. He threw kind of at his ribs, kind of at his chest, could have been his head had Machado ducked or tried to go that way. I've never been thrown at 99. I know what it's like to try to hit 75, I've stood in cages, and it is a bullet, right? I mean, and I can't – you could see from the first step with Machado that it hurt like hell. And I'm with you, Luke. I mean, they clearly don't want to fix this problem.
I mean, it's just, and quite frankly, it's going to be something that if they're going to change, and I didn't expect Major League Baseball to give him a 25-game or 30-game suspension. I mean, the precedent suggested that wasn't going to happen. If this is really going to change and you want to really try to eliminate most of these incidents, and you're always going to have some. I mean, you're not going to eliminate it entirely, but if you're trying to really eliminate this kind of nonsense, and that's what it is, and anyone saying, well, it's part of the game, phooey. It's, just because that's the way it's always been doesn't mean it's okay.
Man, when you call phooey on the radio, that's serious now.
It's nonsense. I mean, it really is. I love baseball. I've watched it my entire life. I played it. Just because beanballs have been part of the game for a long time doesn't mean that that shouldn't be something done to eliminate it. And look, pitching inside is part of the game. I get that. You're going to have some brushback pitches, and you're going to have some that get away. But when it's clear that someone is throwing a 99-mile-per-hour missile at another human being, regardless of whether you were drawing on the previous at bat or what, there's no place for that. And when it's clear that it's blatant, there needs to be serious ramifications, not setting a guy down for one start. It's ridiculous.
And the $2,500 they fine Machado.
I mean, it needs to be something, this needs to be something that, quite frankly, position players and hitters need to bring up with the union. I feel like that's going to be the only way that they're going to, because Major League Baseball is not going to do anything that's out of the realm of what they've done in the past until hitters start to go to the union and say, look, this is ridiculous. I get it that Yordano Ventura is part of the union. I get it that, pitchers A, B, and C are part of the union, but they're taking away my livelihood potentially when they are throwing at me like that. So until that happens, until we see stiffer penalties, and I don't know what the perfect number would be, 25 games, 30 games where a guy's missing 4, 5, 6 starts and really, 1, hurting himself, 2, hurting his team. And I did get a few people joking with me saying, hey, the Royals, you might have been doing them a favor if you were able to sit them down for longer than that, the way he's pitched. But in all seriousness, you got to send a bigger message. You got to send a more severe punishment if you ever want to get rid of this stuff, because a 1-game or a 1-start suspension, in essence, it's just not enough. Quite frankly, Machado deserved a suspension. He can't charge the mound and throw a punch and get off scot-free. So I think all things considered, 4 games
will become 2, right?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance it gets down to 3. I really do, and you don't like that, but that's not the end of the world for the Orioles. Even if they lose all 3 of those games, it's something that you should be able to overcome. But in the case of Ventura, this guy's going to miss 1 start. Are you really doing anything to change his behavior or really getting him to reflect and kind of realize, hey, I messed up? I don't think so. So until we have Major League Baseball committed to that, until we have the union committed to that, these types of things will continue.
Luke Jones joining us here, and the draft. Last thing, let's wrap it up with it. Is there anything to be said about drafting some kid we, quite frankly, never heard of before yesterday when I looked at the Baseball America prospectus?
Well, 3 college pitchers taken on day 1. Cody Sadlock, University of Illinois, Big Ten Pitcher of the Year, right-hander, throws in the low 90s. It was interesting because he was actually a reliever until this past season. They moved him to the starting rotation and held the velocity well, pitched really well, and I think it very clear the point of emphasis on college pitching, because why? The fast track to getting these guys to the big leagues, you hope, over the next year or 2. So, we'll see how it plays out. Clearly when you're picking 27th overall as your first pick, you're not getting the cream of the crop. You're not getting a Kevin Gausman kind of prospect, but you're hoping that Sedlock, the fact that he was only a starting pitcher for 1 year at Illinois, had been a reliever before that, maybe that kept his value down a little bit, and maybe you hope that you've uncovered a bit of a hidden gem. But he was the Big Ten Pitcher of the Year, had a really nice season, and we'll see how it plays out. Their other 2 picks, Keegan Aiken from Western Michigan, a left-hander, and right-hander Matthias Dietz was the 69th overall pick out of John A. Logan College. Can't say I knew too much about him, but hey, we'll see how it plays out. It is clear that this team desperately needs to rebuild its pitching because what little depth they have in terms of starting pitching depth. It's in the majors right now with Mike Wright and Tyler Wilson, and I'm not saying those guys are great options, but in a perfect world, you'd like to have guys like that at least ready and able at AAA. So you're hoping that Sedlock especially can be on a little more of a fast track, and who knows, maybe by the late 2017 or 2018, maybe he's going to be ready by then to be a factor in the rotation. That'd be nice.
I like that he has a Twitter page. That in the modern era, at least, I can go see what the kid's family looks like and having a little bit of fun, playing college ball. That's kind of nice. So, all right, we'll be monitoring the draft. There's plenty more rounds to go here. I'm going to bring some draft experts on next week. In the meantime, Luke, enjoy the games from Toronto this week. We've got mandatory minicamp next week. We got things going on. We're trying to keep the Stanley Cup out of Pittsburgh, right? So, good things are happening. Maybe even have an NBA series before this is all over with. Cleveland wins another game, right?
Yeah, we will see. But, again, nice to see the Orioles get off to a good start on the road trip. And we'll see how the next 6 games play out before they return home. I think, you'll take them holding their own against Toronto and Boston on the road. Just can't have one of those situations where you lose 5 of 6 or anything like that. So, nice start. And, again, the big hat tip, besides Chris Davis driving in the tying and winning runs, Dylan Bundy sets up the bullpen to be able to use all their bullets over the rest of the weekend, which they're going to need playing at Rogers Center, I suspect.
All right, he's Luke. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. I will be at Black Eyed Susan in Glendon on Saturday from 11:30 until 2, signing some copies of Purple Rain 1 and Purple Rain 2. Hope to see you out there for Father's Day. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. Thanks for tuning in out on Facebook Live and on our WNSTV channel on YouTube. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports